Good night, everyone. I hope you had a good day. Now it's time to rest. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and relax. We're here with you for another calm night. Welcome to Stories for Sleep. I see it every night, a tall, dark figure standing near the foot of my bed, no face, no sound, just watching it, never moves, never speaks. But the moment I try to acknowledge it, it steps closer, so now I lie, still breathing slow, eyes barely open, and I pretend I don't see it, because if I let it know, I know it might stop watching and start acting. I used to believe shadows came from light, that every shadow had a source, a lamp, a window, a flickering candle, something physical that cast it. That made it make sense, but this one, it's different. This shadow doesn't follow light, it doesn't need it, and I don't think it's ever been alive. The first time I saw it was 2 months ago. I had just moved into my new apprenticeship rent quiet neighborhood. Top floor with a nice view of the city. It seemed perfect, except for one thing, my bedroom never felt empty. Even when I was alone, the feeling was hard to explain, like a slight pressure in the air. Like someone holding their breath nearby. I chalked it up to city anxiety, or maybe the weird old pipes that hissed late at night. I ignored it, until one night I woke up around 2:47 a.m. My room was completely still. The fan wasn't spinning. The outside street lamp had gone out, and there standing by my closet door was the shadow. It wasn't part of the wall, it wasn't moving, but I could feel it watching me. At first I thought it was a trick of the eyes. Sleep paralysis, maybe, but then I blinked it and it was still there, a tall, thin silhouette, no features. Not even clothes, just a dense black shape, darker than the rest of the room. It didn't move, not even a twitch. I almost called out, almost reached for my phone. But something inside me screamed, don't let it know you see it. So I did the only thing I could. I shut my eyes. I lay still for hours, my heart pounding, every hair on my body standing up. I waited for a sound, a breath, a shift in weight, but nothing came. When I opened my eyes again at dawn, the room was bright, warm, normal, and the shadow was gone for a while. I convinced myself it was a one-time hallucination, stress, lack of sleep, but it came back every night. Always around the same time, always in the same spot, and always still. I began to test it. One night I moved my pillow to the opposite side of the bed. I didn't look at it directly, but I saw it shift. It didn't walk, it just adjusted, as if it glided to stay in its place, always near my feet. I left my closet door open. The next morning it was closed. I tried leaving lights on. They would flicker out just after midnight. My cat stopped entering the bedroom completely, hissed at the doorway, and scratched the floor every night at the same hour. So I changed my routine. I stopped staying up late. I stopped looking at it, and most of all, I pretended not to know, because deep down I realized something. The shadow is waiting, watching for the moment I react, the moment I break the illusion. I don't know what happens after that, and I don't want to. 3 weeks ago things got worse. I woke up one night with the feeling of warm breath on my face, but nothing was there, just the shadow standing closer than usual. No longer at the closet now, beside my bed. I didn't flinch, I didn't scream, I just lay still, tears sliding into my ears, breathing as softly as I could. My fingers trembled under the blanket. It knew I was awake. The next day I installed cameras. I set one in the corner of the room, one facing the bed, one near the closet. I even ran motion detecting lights under the floorboards. That night I stayed awake, pretending to sleep, peeking through barely cracked eyelids. At 2:48 a.m., all the devices shut off. No light, no camera feed, no sound, and I saw it leaning over me. It didn't move like a person, it stretched. Bending like smoke, I couldn't breathe, I couldn't blink. All I could do was lie there, my lips parting just enough to whisper in my head. Please, I don't see you, I don't know you're here, and like mist pulled by wind, it backed away. I checked the camera footage the next day. 11 of the files were intact, but the 12th corrupted. It had been overwritten, not erased. The audio was replaced by soft whispering looped endlessly. A voice that sounded like mine saying, "You know you always knew, now I sleep." With the lights one then though, they die after midnight. I moved my bed to the corner, away from the closet, away from the mirror, but it doesn't matter. The shadow knows, am aware, and it's getting braver. Sometimes I feel fingers brushing my feet, sometimes I hear breathing behind the headboard. Once I woke up with the blanket folded neatly on the floor and my body cold on the bare mattress. And just last night, it sat on the bed. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its weight. It stayed there for an hour. Maybe longer, not watching, just waiting. If you ever see something in your room, something tall, still darker than night dance, look at it, don't name it, don't acknowledge it, because the moment you do, you stop being the watcher and you become the dream. It wants to finish, so I still pretend. I pretend not to see it, and for now it pretends not to touch me. Every night she's asleep beside me, eyes closed, body still, deep breathing, but when I dream she's there, awake, walking, speaking. She tells me things I shouldn't know, warns me of things that haven't happened yet. Then I wake up, and she remembers nothing. Except last night she smiled in real life, and whispered, "Don't dream tonight." We met in college, fell in love fast, moved in after 2 years. Life was quiet, peaceful, and mostly normal. Her name was Quiet, her energy soft. She liked books, rainy days, and falling asleep on my chest. She rarely remembered her dreams, made once a month at Mosfot. I remembered mine vividly, too vividly, and lately they all had one thing in common, her. It started small. A few months ago I began dreaming about walking through endless hallways. In every dream I would pass dozens of closed doors, some locked, some cracked open. But at the very end of the hallway, I'd find her standing perfectly still, eyes wide open, not blinking, just watching me. She never said anything. In the first few dreams, just watched. Then one night she spoke, "Don't open the red door." I asked her what she meant, but she only repeated the same thing. "Don't open the red door." The dream ended. I woke up in sweat. Her body was curled next to mine, fast asleep. At first, I told myself it was my subconscious. Maybe I was worried about her or projecting something, but the dreams kept coming every night. Each one deeper, stranger, more real. She'd always be there somewhere inside the dream world. She wasn't dreamlike. She didn't flicker or float like dream people. She was vivid, solid to real. She remembered things. She asked questions from previous dreams. She even called out to me once before. I found her in the dream this way. Hurry, we don't have time. After 2 weeks, I told her about the dreams. She laughed nervously. "I don't dream much," she said. "And I definitely don't talk in them." I pushed her gently for more. "Do you ever feel awake while dreaming, like really aware?" She shook her head no. "But sometimes I do wake up feeling like I've been talking all night." She didn't understand, but I knew something wasn't right. Then the red door appeared. It was at the end of the hallway, tall, old, wooden, covered in faint scratch marks. I walked past it in silence the first time. She stood at the other end waiting. "Good," she said. "You didn't open it." I asked what was behind it. Her eyes grew wide. Parts of me that should never wake up that night. I didn't sleep well. My heart raced until morning. Her body lying beside me twitched on sages. As I opened my eyes, I asked if she had any dreams. She said no, but her hands were clenched tight into fists. One day I tried a test. I whispered a random phrase to her in the dream, something specific and strange. The river flows backward on Sundays. When we woke up, I didn't say anything. Hours later, while brushing her hair, she suddenly said, "Hey, that river thing you mentioned, that's not real, right?" I froze. "What did you say?" She blinked slowly. "The thing about rivers flowing backward. I think I dreamed it weird, huh?" She didn't remember saying it in the dream, but some part of her heard it. The line between sleep and wake began to blur some nights. Her dream self told me future things. "You'll get a call tomorrow. Don't answer. There will be 3 knocks tonight. Ignore them. The person wearing red on Tuesday is lying, every time." I listened. Something weird happened. A call came from an unknown number. Someone knocked on our door 3 times, at 300 am. No. 1. Was there a coworker wore red on Tuesday and tried to scam me into a fake investment? I began to believe it wasn't just dreaming. It was something else, like her soul was awake. When her body was not, then came the night. Everything changed. She wasn't at the end of the hallway anymore. She was inside the red door. I could hear her voice behind it. Screaming, crying. I stood frozen. I remembered what she said: "Don't open the red door," but I couldn't leave her. So I opened it. Inside was nothing but darkness. A swirling, sucking void. Cold air rushed out. I couldn't breathe. I felt something wrap around my leg and pull me in. The next thing I remember was her face, real life, standing over me, eyes wide awake, but she wasn't speaking. She was smiling. She whispered, "You shouldn't have opened it." Then she kissed my forehead and lay back in bed and fell asleep again. Now it's different. She talks in her sleep in full sentences, not mumbling. She walks in her sleep but never remembers. Sometimes she sits up and watches me. Last night she whispered in my ear, "Hayes still behind the door, but now he knows your name." I don't know who he is, but I wake up with bruises on my wrist, like someone pulling me through something, and sometimes she wakes up with mud on her feet. I don't sleep much anymore, because when I do, she's not there waiting at the end of the hallway. He is. And Hayes wearing her face now. If your partner starts showing up in your dreams, don't follow them, don't ask questions, and never ever open a red door, because what dreams show, you might not belong to the living anymore. Everyone has a shadow. It moves when you move. It follows your body like a loyal ghost, but mine doesn't wait for me to move. When I sleep, it stretches first. It gets up before I do. It reaches out with long, trembling fingers before my alarm rings. At first I thought it was sleep paralysis, until I saw it turn to face me, until I realized it wasn't following me anymore. It was leading me. For most of my life, I never feared the dark. I used to joke that the scariest things happened in daylight. Bill's bad news. Nighttime was quiet, peaceful, until a few months ago. That's when the dreams started, and not normal ones. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, feeling watched, not by something in the room but by the floor, the walls, the corners where light never touched. Then I noticed something wrong with my shadow. It was small at first, subtle. My arm would twitch in bed, and the shadow cast on the wall by the streetlight would move, but not at the same time. I thought I was imagining it, maybe a trick of the eyes. Then one night I reached for the glass of water beside my bed and my shadow reached first. I froze. Its hand was already stretched out on the wall, fingertips brushing the outline of the lamp. Before I even moved, I dropped the glass, spilling it everywhere. Still, I convinced myself it was nothing. I mean, it had to be right. Shadows don't move on their own. Then it escalated. One night, I positioned my bed lamp directly beside me, casting my shadow straight onto the wall across The room I lay completely still, no movement, no blinking, just watching at 2:41 a.m. Saw it, my shadow's chest rose before mine did. It was like watching someone breathe in before. I did a full second ahead, like it knew I was about to move and didn't. Before me, that's when the fear began to grow. I stopped using lights in my room, I closed the curtains, I even taped black cloth over the windows. No shadows, no fear, but that only made things worse, because when you take away light, the dark becomes solid, and whatever was happening to me, it didn't need light anymore. One night I left my phone recording video. Just a test. I wanted to prove to myself that nothing strange was happening, but when I played back the video the next morning, I saw something that still makes me sick. At exactly 300 a.m., while I was still lying flat on my back, my blanket lifted slightly, as if something beneath me was moving without my body. And against the wall, barely visible in the corner of the room, a shadow stood up. I took the video to a sleep doctor. He watched it without saying a word, then he asked how long I'd been experiencing this. I told him 2 months. He asked if anyone else had seen the shadow move. I said no, I live alone. He leaned forward and whispered, "You're not the first." I stared at him confused. "What do you mean?" He pulled out a folder from his desk drawer. Inside were printed still saw their videos, other shadows, people just like me. All showing the same thing, shadows that moved independently. Some were barely ahead of the real body, others were already standing, stretching, reaching, while the host lay motionless. He said it had a name. Eco-sleeper syndrome, not a real medical term or like a code, but it described people whose shadows seemed too separate during deep sleep. Most people's shadows are echoes, he said, but yours is becoming a voice. That night, I didn't sleep. But it didn't matter, because my shadow did. At 3:13 a.m., I saw it slide across the wall. Not walking, not crawling, just slithering. Like liquid, it rose upright at the end of my bed. I stared at it, not breathing. It didn't match my posture. I was sitting, it was standing. I blinked in, its head turned toward me. No face, just a silhouette, but I felt it grin. "You're late," it whispered. It was the first time I ever heard it speak. After that, it started mimicking things I hadn't done yet. I'd turn my head slowly and realize it already had. I'd pick up my thin end. It would lift its hand before me. I tested it dozens of times. No matter what I did, my shadow was faster, as if it was living 1 second ahead of me. I tried sleeping in other rooms, hotels, friends, couches. It followed, always there. 1 second early, waiting, smiling. Then came the worst night. I woke up to find 2 shadows. One on the wall, one on the ceiling. The one on the wall was minute too early, too eager. The one on the ceiling was reaching down. It wasn't my shape, it wasn't anyone's shape. Its arms were longer, fingers sharper, and its head tilted like it didn't understand me. The next morning there were scratches on my chest, thin, shallow, but not from me. And definitely not from anything physical. It felt like the shadow had marked me, claimed me. I've tried everything, therapy, exorcisms, burning sage, prayer, medication, but the shadow won't stop. I've seen it laugh, I've seen it dance, while I cry in bed. Once I turned on the light in a panikin, the shadow didn't disappear, it just stood there, in perfect pitch black shape, as if the light belonged to it. I don't know what it wants, I don't know what I've done, but it's not copying me anymore. It's training me to follow it. If you've ever noticed your shadow flinch before you do, if you've ever felt watched by something that looks exactly like you, don't look at it too long, because once you see it move first, it knows you're watching, and once it knows you're watching, it's your turn to follow. We all sleep with our shadows. They stretch on the walls, shift with the moonlight, and follow us from dream to dream. But every night for the past 2 weeks I've woken up without mine, no silhouette on the floor, no outline on the curtain, just me and an absence, a space where it should be. I didn't think shadows could leave, but now it returns before sunrise, earth on its feet, and blood on its hands. I never paid attention to my shadow before. Like most people, it was just their part of me, a silent copy, always in step, always obedient, until the first night I noticed it missing. It was 3:22 a.m. I woke up suddenly, dream mouth racing heart, like I'd been running in my dreams. I sat up, pulled the blanket aside, and stood to walk to the bathroom. That's it. When I noticed something strange, no shadow, the hallway light was on. There was nothing blocking the light, but on the floor just one pair of feet, and no dark outline behind me. I turned in circles, checked the wall, the floor, even the ceiling, nothing. I laughed it off at first, told myself I must be half asleep, maybe the angle was off, maybe my brain was playing tricks, but the next night it happened again. And again, and again. Every night, I'd go to sleep like normal, but I'd wake up somewhere between 230 and 330, am without my shadow, and then right before dawn, it would be back. Not like before, not quietly blending into the corner, no. Now it stood closer, taller, a little too tall, a little too slow in its movements. I'd wave my hand quickly and the shadow would hesitate, then follow like it had to remember how to be me. One morning I woke up with dirt on my sheets, not from my shoes. Not from outside. I lived in a third-floor apartment. I hadn't gone anywhere, but the shadow had. I started documenting everything. Phone, notes, voice memos, videos. I left the camera recording overnight. The first few nights, nothing, just hours of me sleeping. Then one morning, I checked the footage at exactly 3:06 a.m. I turned over in my sleep, but my shadow didn't, it stayed. Facing the camera, still motionless, watching at 309, it faded from the screen. Not walked away, faded like fog in reverse. The room stayed the same, my body didn't move again. But I was alone, completely alone. I tried everything to keep it close. I set up nightlights around my bed, covered the walls with foil to reflect light, even slept with a flashlight aimed at the floor. Still every night I woke, opened, it was gone, but each morning it returned, and now it brings souvenirs, small horrible things. A scrap of what looks like animal fur, a torn piece of red fabric, once a burnt matchstick resting beside my pillow. I stopped throwing them away. I keep them in a box now labeled things my shadow brought back. Then came the smell, rot, wet leaves. Iron like a forest after a thunderstorm, mixed with something dead. I don't live near any woods. I started waking up with scratches. Not deep, just enough to sting. My fingernails were clean. My bed sheets had no tears. The marks always appeared on my back like something touched me when I couldn't move. And then came the knock, 3 knocks. Every morning at 4:44 a.m. on the inside of my closet door. I opened it the first time, heart pounding, flashlight, shaking, nothing inside, just hanging clothes, and a stack of shoes. But when I stepped back, I saw it, a shadow on the back wall of the closet, facing me, no body. Just the shadow. I slammed the door shut and didn't open it for 3 days, the scariest part. My reflection started acting strange in mirrors. My shadow moves, even when I don't. Once I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. I was still not blinking, but my shadow waved slowly. Like saying goodbye. Another time, I turned away to grab a towelette. In the corner of the mirror, my shadow was still facing me, smiling, except shadows don't smile. I spoke to a woman online who runs a dream research blog. I told her everything. She said she'd heard of shadow walkers before, beings that live just behind our reality, using shadows as their bodies. Most people's shadows stay loyal. Some, however, disconnect. They go exploring, they feed, and sometimes they come back with something else inside. She warned me, if your shadow returns different, don't let it touch you, but I already had too many times last night. I didn't wake up on my own. I was shaken awake, not by hands, not by sound, by a feeling of something climbing back into me. I gasped, opened my eyes, felt my muscles tense for just a second. I couldn't breathe, my whole body was freezing. And then warmth, a sudden heavy warmth. I looked to the wall, and saw my shadow return, crawling from under the bed. Stretching, merging, like it had been somewhere far, somewhere dark, somewhere alive. Now, even in daylight, my shadow feels wrong, it twitches. Sometimes lingers in place. When I move, it has a hollow spot in the chest, like a missing piece. I catch people staring at it in public. Dogs bark, lights flicker. I'm scared to sleep again, but am also scared not to, because I think if I go too long without it, it'll find someone else. And if you start waking up without your shadow too, if it disappears between 2 and 4 a.m., whatever you do, don't welcome it back. Because it might not be your shadow anymore, and it might be bringing something else with it. Shadows follow us their hours always. That's what I believe it until I woke up one night to find a shadow standing over me, but it wasn't mine. I was lying still. Lights were off, no movement, no sound, and yet on the ceiling across the bed, stretching down the wall there, it was a tall, dark figure, with no body to cast it. I stared at it for hours. It didn't move until it leaned down and whispered my name. It began a month ago, on a night like any other. I had finished work late, turned off the lights and climbed into bed. The room was quiet. My window faced a street lamp that gave off just enough glow to cast soft shadows against the walls. As I lay down and turned to the side, I saw my own shadow stretch across the room's holder arm, head-shaped exactly like me, but something didn't feel right. There was a second shadow. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light. Maybe a tree outside, maybe an old coat on the door, but as I stared harder, I realized it was shaped like a person, tall, too tall. Its head nearly touched the ceiling. It was standing by the foot of my bed, completely still. My heart dropped. I didn't move. I told myself it was nothing, just a mistake, just my eyes adjusting. Then it took a step forward, but I didn't hear a sound, and worse, nothing was there, just the shadow moving on its own. The next morning I searched every inch of the room. Checked the windows, the closet under the bed. I even used a flashlight to try recreating the shape. Nothing worked. The shape wouldn't appear again, but every time I looked at that part of the room, I felt a coldness in my chest, like a pressure, like a memory pressing against my lungs. I tried forgetting it, but every night afterward I saw something again. It would never be clear sometimes. It was just a long shadow on the door, sometimes a handprint-shaped darkness on the wall, but I always knew it wasn't mine. Then came the breathing, soft at first, like air moving through cloth. It would start around 300 a.m. I'd be half asleep, eyes closed, and feel something warm hovering over my face. My blanket wouldn't move, the air wouldn't shift, but I could feel it breath inches from me. And the shadow, it was closer now, not at the foot of the bed anymore. It was beside me, facing me, and even though I never heard it speak, I could feel its thoughts. It was curious, observing, waiting, but for what I didn't know. One night I woke up, and it was gone. No shadows, no figures, nothing strange. I slept deeply and peacefully, almost too peacefully, but the next morning my reflection didn't match me when I yawned. It smiled when I blinked. It didn't and when I turned to walk away, the reflection stood still for 1 extra second staring back. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen under bright light, trying to stay awake at 3:16 a.m. Every light flickered off. The bulbs didn't pop, the power didn't cut, they just dimmed to black, and there it was again. The shadow standing behind me, no light, no movement, but there it wastes its outline sharp against the floor, even though there was no light to make it. I turned around, nothing. I turned back, still there. I started recording everything. Set up motion sensors, night vision cameras, temperature gauges, but the shadow never appeared on video, only I could see it, and now it was starting to follow me outside. I'd walk past glass doors and see an extra silhouette beside mine. I'd look down at the sidewalk and see a third pair of feet. I confronted it once, stood in my living room, looked directly at the wall where I knew it would appear, and I said, "What do you want?" It didn't speak, but the lights dimmed, and on the wall it nodded. Then came the night. I woke up with no shadow at all. Mine was gone. I stood up, walked through the house, turned on every light, nothing. I was invisible to the walls, but it was there. The other one watching me, a black shape with no owner, stretched tall and thin, no features, just presence. And that night it moved for the first time, toward me. I froze, couldn't scream, couldn't move. It raised a hand slowly, matching where my hand would be if I'd reached out, and then it lowered its hand into the shadow of the floor, and my hand went numb. I collapsed for hours. I lay there, unable to move my fingers. The doctors later said it was a nerve problem. They couldn't explain why it came back to normal by sunrise, but I knew the shadow had taken a piece of me. Now every night I lock every door, I sleep with every light on, but I still wake up and see it standing over me, not touching me, just measuring like it's waiting for my shape to fit perfectly. It's not trying to mimic me anymore. It's trying to become me, and I think the moment it matches me exactly, I won't wake up again, because it will. So if you ever see a shadow near you that doesn't belong, if it stands at the foot of your bed, if it moves when you don't run, because once it learns enough, you're the one who becomes the shadow. They said the room was empty, one chair, one bulb, one person, but the walls were dancing with shadows, shadows that moved without cause, that bent at odd angles, that reached toward the ceiling and curled like fingers. There were no windows, no second light source, and I swear I only saw one man sitting in that room, but there were too many shadows for one body, and some of them were staring back. It started with an internship. I was offered a position at a psychological research institute just outside the city, nothing fancy. Just a few weeks of observation and filing reports. Most of the cases were mild anxiety patients. Dream studies, memory therapy, but there was one locked wing on the 3rd floor. It required special clearance staff, called it the Echo Ward. They didn't talk much about it. Just warnings: don't go there alone. Never enter after lights out. Don't speak to anyone who isn't on the list. I thought it was for higher risk patients, but eventually, I was asked to help document a session. Just one, just to observe. The subject's file was thin, name, redacted age, unknown behavior, silent, mostly refused to eat when lights were off. No history of violence, spoke rarely, but when he did, staff said he mentioned shadows, not ghosts, not hallucinations. Just the shadows. I followed Dr. Halber into the room that day. It was small, bare white walls, one ceiling light. A single metal chair sat in the center, and there he was, the man, tall, thin face, pale like paper, hands resting calmly in his lap, eyes fixed on nothing, and yet the walls behind him danced. There were at least 7 shadows on the wall, but only one man. At first I thought it was my eyes adjusting, maybe reflections from the hallway. But there were no windows, no cracks, just solid walls. Floor and ceiling. I took a step closer. One of the shadows twitched. Dr. Halbert began the session like any other calm voice. Gentle questions, but the man didn't respond. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe loudly. He just sat still, and the shadows, they moved, not dramatically, just enough to make your skin crawl. A tilt of the head here, a slight raise of a hand there. Out of sync with the man's actual body, one shadow turned its head and stared directly at me. I felt a pressure in my chest, like the air had turned thick. At the 12-minute mark, the man spoke. Very softly, barely a whisper. "They don't like you." Watching Dr. Halbert asked. "Who? The old ones, the ones made of thought and dust. They stay quiet when it's bright, but your eyes bring the dark." The temperature in the room dropped. I could feel it. My breath started fogging. The shadows grew longer. The man raised his hands slowly. Every single shadow lifted an arm except one stayed still. It didn't follow his movement. That's when I realized something. That shadow wasn't his eye. Stared at it. All the others mirrored him. This one stood differently. Its fingers twitched, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It moved after him, not with him, and then it turned. Fully turned. Shadows aren't supposed to do that, but this one faced me, head crooked, arms long, no features, just darkness with intention. My heart pounded. I looked at the doctor. He didn't seem to notice. The man in the chair smiled faintly. "It chooses someone new each night," he whispered. "Tonight, it likes you." I turned to leave. The door wouldn't budge. Dr. Halbert calmly ended the session and walked out. The man in the chair didn't move. The shadows melted back into the wall, but the extra one stayed behind it, followed me down the hall. Every reflective surface, I saw it just behind me. It doesn't show up in photos, it doesn't show up on security cameras, but I see it always just a few feet away. In mirrors, in puddles, on the walls, when the lights flicker. Since that day my own shadow doesn't match me anymore. It lags when I raise my arm. Sometimes I wake up and find it standing in the corner of my room, detached from my body. I don't sleep well. Lights on, curtains drawn, mirrors covered, and yet when I close my eyes, I see a room, one chair, one man, and far too many shadows. They said it was a routine observation, that nothing would come home with me. But when I look at the wall now, there's always one extra shape, and it's getting closer each night. I woke up in a dream where the sky was black. No stars, no moon, no sunrise, only a pale horizon that never changed. People walked like ghosts. Time didn't pass, they said. "You don't belong here yet," but I kept coming back every time I slept, and now I can't remember which world is real, because last night someone whispered you were born here. You've only been dreaming of the sun. It started after the accident. I had fallen off my bike late one evening on a quiet road outside town. The crash wasn't bad, just a bump on the head and a twisted ankle, but after that night, my sleep changed. I didn't dream about memories or faces or school life. I used to. Instead, I began waking up somewhere else entirely, a world where the sun never rose the first time. I entered that place. I thought it was a nightmare. I stood in the middle of a cracked street, surrounded by crooked buildings and flickering lamps that gave off no real warmth. The sky was a dull charcoal gray, darker near the edges, as if the horizon was burnt. Everything felt cold and forgotten. I walked for hours, unsure of what I was looking for. The people there didn't speak. They wandered slow, pale, wearing clothes too old, too thin. Their eyes didn't shine, they didn't blink, but they all looked at Melik. They recognized something in me that I didn't yet understand. I woke up in my own bed, gasping. It was morning, the sun was out, birds were singing. Everything felt normal, but I couldn't forget what I saw. I couldn't shake that world. The next night I returned. Same streets, same sky, only this time someone whispered in my ear, "You're not supposed to be here yet." I turned around, but no one was near me. A man was staring at a broken lamppost. A woman clutched a rusted umbrella. Though there was no rain, I walked faster. This time I tried to leave the town, walk past the border bit. No matter where I went, I circled back to the same alley. And carved on the wall, there was a message. Don't dream too long, it forgets to let you out. Days passed. Each night I returned, I started remembering details. The rust on the door handles, the soft hum beneath the streets, the way people never looked at each other at me. I tried telling my friends, my parents, my doctor. They said it was trauma, stress, my brain healing from the fall. But I didn't feel broken, I felt pulled. Each night the dreams got longer. Each morning I woke up more tired. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was growing around me. One night, I met a girl near the Clockworth only structure that stood taller than the rest. She looked normal, blinking, speaking alive. She said her name was Eerie. You were born here, she told me, but something pulled you away and towed the world of warmth and light. I laughed, told her that didn't make sense. That world is the dream, she whispered. This is home. You just forgot. I backed away. She didn't follow. She just looked up at the sky and said, the sun isn't missing. It never existed after that night. Things changed back in my real life. The sun felt dimmer, colors faded, food lost taste. My reflection didn't quite match me anymore. Me smile curved wrong. My eyes didn't focus. At school people spoke slower. I stopped understanding jokes. Everything felt artificial. And when I slept, the dark world felt brighter in comparison. It welcomed me. I could walk the streets without fear. People nodded at me now. Some even whispered my name. One night, Eerie showed me something terrifying, a mirror, but it didn't reflect my face. It showed me standing in the sunlit world, asleep in my bed, surrounded by people watching me. Nurses, doctors, machines. You've been asleep, she said, for weeks. That's when it hit me. The bike crash was worse than I remembered. Maybe I never got up. Maybe I've been in a coma this whole time. And this dark, silent world, is my mind trying to tell me the truth? Or maybe this is the real world, and everything else was just a warm, shallow illusion. I tried to force myself awake. In the dream, I climbed the tower. I screamed, I begged for the sky to change, but Eerie stopped me. If you leave too early, she warned, you'll forget everything, and when you return, they won't recognize you. Not even yourself. That night, I didn't wake up. I stayed. Now I don't know how long I've been here. The town never changes. The people still whisper, and I still see that reflection of Meisel flaying, still covered in wires, pale, forgotten, but the sun has never risen. And now I'm not sure I want it to, because in this place, I feel seen, I feel true. If you ever find yourself dreaming of a place with no sun, don't stay too long. Don't listen to the voices. And whatever you do, don't let it feel like home. Because the longer you dream, the less you'll remember what warmth ever felt like. I've been recording myself while I sleep, not for dreams, just to catch sleep talking. It started out funny, harmless phrases, nonsense mumbling. But last week something changed. The voice that speaks at night isn't mine, it's deeper, slower, not matching my tone, and last night it whispered my full name, then said, "This body fits better than the last one." At first I just wanted to hear myself snore. I downloaded a sleep app to track my rest, how often I moved, and if I talk in my sleep. It became a bit of a habit, checking the logs in the morning, laughing at the sounds. The app saved short clips when noises happened. Most nights it was the same. light breathing, a cough, the occasional grunt. Once I mumbled something about missing a train, funny, weird. But nothing scary that changed the night. I said my name in my sleep. The clip was 5 seconds long. It didn't sound like me. The voice was deeper, slower, almost calm in a sinister way. It said, "Ethan, stay still. It's not your turn yet. My name is Ethan." But I had no memory of dreaming or saying anything like that. I played the clip over and over. It didn't sound like my voice. It didn't sound like something I'd say. I sent it to my friend Liam. He said it sounded like it was edited, like 2 voices layered on top of each other, one slightly distorted. That night, I kept the lights on. More recordings followed, each night a new clip. Some nights it said nothing clear, just strange syllables. Other nights it would repeat things. "Don't look under the bed, he sees you now. It's warmer in here than your real skin." The voice began to change even more. It didn't rise and fall like human speech. It was steady to steady, unemotional, like something learning to mimic me. One clip said, "He wore this voice before. He'll wear it after I started sleeping worse. I'd wake up with sweat on my neck, my mouth dry, my hands clenched." The app showed that I moved a lot at night, twisting, turning, sitting up. But I had no memory of it. One morning I found scratches on my forearm, not deep, but fresh. I checked the camera on my phone. I had set it on the nightstand, just to test. Just one night of filming, around 2:43 a.m. I sat up straight, not slowly like someone pulled me up. I looked directly at the camera, smiled, then said, in a voice that wasn't mine, "We're finally syncing." I deleted the video. I threw my phone across the room, but I couldn't forget that voice, or the way my body moved without me. I went to a sleep specialist. They ran tests, hooked me up to machines, everything looks fine, they said. Just some parasomnia, maybe sleepwalking, maybe mild dissociation. But I knew it wasn't just sleep. I was being borrowed. I stayed awake for 48 hours straight. I drank coffee, watched movies, paced the halls. I thought maybe if I didn't sleep it would stop, but the moment I dozed off, barely 10 minutes, I jerked awake with a new voice in my head. Not a dream, not a thought, a voice calm and clear. "You're making this difficult." I started noticing other changes. My reflection was off. My eyes would lag just for a second. When I blinked, my voice during the day started sounding hoarser, and sagest unseen voice echoed when I was alone in the room. It wasn't an echo from the walls. It was like someone said it with me, half a beat behind. I confronted the app. I scrolled through old recordings, went back a month. The voice didn't just start recently. It was always there, faint breathing beneath my words, layered into my snores, whispering when I coughed. Always watching, always learning. Then one morning I woke up outside. I was in my backyard, barefoot, covered in dirt. There was a symbol drawn in the soil, a circle with lines that looked like rib bones. My phone was in my hand. The screen opened to the recording app. The latest file was labeled "Integration Complete." I played it. The voice said, "Ethan has been helpful, but this one will do." Then laughter. My laughter, but wrong. I've stopped sleeping. I taped my mouth shut. I wear gloves to avoid scratching myself, but the voice speaks without my mouth now. It whispers and mirrors, in the hum of the fridge, in the static when I tune the radio. And sometimes it answers my friends before I can. Last night, I passed by a mirror, and my reflection said, "You're not dreaming anymore, I am." If you're thinking of recording your sleep, don't, because what you hear might not be you. And if the voice says your name, you're already too late. It started on the first day of 9th grade, nothing dramatic, just a weird feeling. Like my shadow was off. It moved slower, bent wrong. It wasn't copying me anymore, it was watching. Then my classmates noticed it too, and the shadow started showing up before I arrived, I used to walk to school alone. Now I think something's walking with me, and it's wearing my shape. The first time I noticed it, I was brushing my teeth, just a normal morning sun coming through the window. Music playing in the background. I leaned to rinse my mouth and caught my shadow on the tiled wall beside me. Only my arm was still holding the brush, but the shadow had already lowered its hand. I froze, then blinked, everything synced again. I laughed, must have been the light angle. I told myself I didn't laugh. The next day, walking to school, I passed the usual spots. Mrs. Langley's front garden, the old fence with the missing plank, and the corner shop where Mr. Davis sold newspapers and gum. As I stepped onto the school driveway, I saw something on the sidewalk beside me, my shadow, but I hadn't reached the gate yet, and the shadow was already at the door, waiting. It stood there like a dark cutout on the pavement, too tall, too thin still, and when I walked forward it didn't move. Until I stepped on the school stairs, then it snapped back into place, merging with my feet like nothing was wrong. That night I dreamt of it. I stood in an empty school hallway, my shadow was stretched out behind me, but then it stood up separated. Still shaped like me, but empty, hollow, and then it whispered, "Now you follow me." I woke up gasping, the lights were off. But my shadow was still on the wall. At school things got stranger. I sat down at my desk, and someone behind me muttered, "Dude, your shadow just waved at me." I turned around, what, I swear your shadow waved like this. He raised his hand, fingers spread. I checked. My shadow was normal, arms at my side. Later in science lab, the overhead lights were harsh shadows, crisp and sharp. I looked down and saw something impossible. My shadow had eyes not drawn, not imagined, two dark circles within the head of the shadow, blinking slowly. I screamed, everyone turned, but when they looked, nothing was there, just me and the shadow that now blinked in time with my heartbeat. I begged my mom to let me stay home. She thought I was being dramatic, said it was back to school nerves, but I wasn't nervous. I was being haunted. Over the next week my teachers started noticing, did someone just walk behind me? Was someone at the window? Why does your shadow stretch in two directions? They blamed the flickering lights, the faulty windows. They didn't know how cold the air felt when the shadow pulled away. I tried to ignore it, ignore the way it sometimes stood still when I moved, ignore the whispers, but ignoring didn't work. On Friday something changed. I walked to school, and as I neared the front doors, I saw it again, already waiting. But this time the shadow didn't look like me, it was taller, thinner, its arms hung too long at the sides, its head twitched, and the second I saw it grinned. Shadows aren't supposed to smile. I ran back home, locked my bedroom, covered the windows, but that night I saw it again inside my room, not just on the while it stood by my desk, not touching anything, just looking. I cried and it whispered back, "You used to be light, now you're mine." I stopped going to school, but they said the shadow still shows up. My classmates saw it, they said it walks the halls, lingers near my old locker. Sometimes it just stands in front of the bathroom mirror. A boy in math class said it followed him home once. Hayes in therapy now. Am not safe here because when I turn around too fast, sometimes I see it facing me instead of behind me, like I'm the one casting a shadow note on the wall. But in the real world, if you see a shadow that doesn't match its person, don't follow it, don't speak to it, don't even blink, because once it notices you, it learns your shape, and once it learns, it walks with you forever. Every night I dream the same thing. I walk into the bathroom, I turn on the light, I look into the mirror, but there's no reflection. Just an empty room behind the glass, no version of me, no face, no shadow, and when I try to speak, the mirror version speaks first, only it. doesn't say what I'm thinking, and each night it steps closer. It started a month ago. At first it felt like nothing, just strange dreams I'd be walking through the halls of my house in the middle of the night. I'd find myself in front of the bathroom mirror staring, waiting, but my reflection wouldn't show up, just blackness or a room without me in it. When I woke up, I'd feel confused, but I always shrugged it off. Everyone has weird dreams sometimes, right? But then it became every night the mirror dreams started repeating, same place, same silence, only difference. Each night, I'd get a few steps closer to the mirror, but still no reflection. One night I whispered to the glass, "Is anyone there?" And something whispered back, "Not yet." I began checking mirrors after waking, every single one, bathroom, bedroom, hallway, always normal. My reflection was there, looking tired but real. But at night in dreams, reflection was gone. Then came the first real sign that something was wrong. I had a sleep app that takes pictures when I move too much at night. It saved one image at 3:16 a.m. I opened the file and froze in the photo. I was lying in bed, but some things beside me, facing my mirror, and that mirror still showed nothing back. I stopped sleeping in my room. I moved to the living room couch, no mirrors there, but the dreams followed. Now I didn't have to walk to the bathroom. The mirror would find me standing in strange places. Abandoned malls, underground stations, classrooms I hadn't seen in years. No matter where I went in the dream, there was always a mirror, and always no reflection. Until the night something else appeared in the glass. It wasn't me. It had my height, my build, my hair, but its eyes were all black, and when it moved, I didn't. I watched it raise a hand, place its palm against the mirror. I tried to lift mine to it. I was frozen, and then it spoke. "You don't belong here anymore." I woke up screaming, cold sweat, dry throat. I turned every light on in the house. Checked every mirror, but that night, for the first time in waking life, I couldn't see myself, not fully. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The light was on, but my reflection was slow, like it was buffering. My eyes blinked out of sync, my lips moved. Seconds after I spoke, I touched the glass, and it felt like skin. I went to a doctor's, sleep disorder, maybe stress, they said. But how do I explain that I no longer trust mirrors? I covered them all in the house, everyone with cloths, bedsheets, cardboard, but now I hear whispers from behind the covers at night, soft tapping. And once I saw fingers pushing out from the glass, stretching the fabric. Then came the worst part. One night, I finally saw a reflection. I was back in the dream bathroom. Mirror, bright lights, white walls. But this time my reflection was there, smiling, too wide, too still. Then it said, "Now you're the dream. I'm the one who wakes up." I woke up gasping, ran to the bathroom, yanked the sheet off the mirror. My reflection was there, but it blinked before I did it, smiled without me smiling, and then it whispered, "Ro, the glass, you should have stayed asleep now, every day." I feel like I'm not the one walking. I feel like I'm being watched from inside the glass. I see it blink. Wrong, smirk. When I'm serious, sometimes I hear a knock from the other side of the mirror, and worse, sometimes I feel it move first. If you ever stop seeing your reflection in dreams, run, don't speak to it, don't listen, because it's waiting, and the moment it figures out how to mimic you, it doesn't want to stay in the mirror anymore. It wants your light, and you'll be the one trapped in the dark watching it live your reality. They said the church was abandoned for years, but the floorboards were still warm, the candles still melted slowly overnight, and the shadows, they didn't belong to anything. They danced even when I wasn't moving. I only stayed one night, just one, but now the shadows are in my house, and they know my name. I don't usually believe in ghost stories, Even when people warned me about the old hilltop church, I thought it was just local superstition. It had been empty for decades, no services, no people. Just wind and dust, but it was a safe place to crash after my car broke down on the highway. I didn't have a signal, and the nearest town was 6 miles away. So I walked toward the only visible structure under the moonlight, the church. It looked abandoned, but the front door creaked open easily, no resistance, like it was waiting for someone. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with age, yet somehow not cold. The wooden pews were dusty but not broken. The altar was covered in a white cloth that looked too clean. For a forgotten place, I laid out my sleeping bag on one of the pews, lit a single candle from my bag. I whispered just one night, and tried to sleep. That was my mistake. The first thing I noticed was the silence, not peaceful dead, no wind outside. No creaks of wood, just stillness. Then I opened my eyes. The candle I lit was still burning. But now there were 3 shadows flickering on the walls, and I was the only person inside. I froze. They didn't move like candlelight flickers, they shifted. Like people pacing slowly, one by one, they slid across the wooden walls, stretching longer, bending, whispering, yes, whispering. I couldn't make out words. Just the low hum of breath. I whispered, "Who's there?" All 3 shadows stopped moving, and one of them turned without a body, just the shadow's head tilting toward me. I don't know how, but I felt it smile. I ran out of that church barefoot, leaving everything behind. The morning sun was just rising when I reached the road. My phone buzzed signal back. I hitchhiked to the next town, told myself it was stress, exhaustion, maybe fumes from mold or paint, until that night I came home, locked every door, tried to forget. At around 200 a.m., I walked past the hallway light, and I saw it, a 4th shadow following mine. It was taller, thinner, and late, like it lagged behind, unsure how to move right. Over the next few days they multiplied in the kitchen. Me reflection in the glass door showed someone behind me. In the shower, fog on the mirror revealed a handprint. On the inside, even my pet cat refused to enter certain rooms now. She just stared at the ceiling, tail twitching, ears back. I called a priest. He walked around the house, sprinkled water, whispered prayers, but as he passed the hallway he paused. "Did you repaint?" he asked, pointing no. He reached out and touched the wall. His fingers came back, black burnt soot, but there had been no fire. That night I dreamed of the church again, but this time I was chained to the altar, and the shadows danced around me, whispering louder, "You brought us home." I screamed myself awake. Now every shadow in my house is wrong. Even in daylight, they twitch, they don't follow physics. Sometimes they stretch across rooms when there's no one there to cast them, and at 300 a.m., I hear footsteps on the ceiling, not above, not in the attic. On the ceiling, upside down, pacing over my head. I tried moving, new apartment, new city, but the shadows moved with me. Because once they follow you home, they don't leave, they don't want your house, they want you, your movements, your voice, your soul. If you ever find yourself near an old abandoned church, don't go inside, don't light a candle, don't whisper, because the shadows are always listening, and they are looking for a ride out. Just one night is all it takes, and when you leave, they leave with you. started last Thursday. I was getting ready for bed when I noticed something strange. My bed was casting 3 shadows on the wall. But there's only one source of light, and only one person sleeping in the bed. I live alone, no guests, no pets, but every night since then the shadows grow closer, and I swear one of them is looking at me. I've always had trouble sleeping. Note insomniagist. Unease like something was always off in the room at night, but last Thursday was the first time I had proof. ID. Just finished brushing my teeth, I turned off the bathroom light and walked into my room. The table lamp by the bed cast a warm yellow glow across the wall. That's when I saw them, 3 shadows. Long and sharp stretched across the wall. One was mine, the shape matched my body, same height, same stance. The second shadow. It was shorter, hunched, shoulders raised, like it was creeping forward. The third was tall, almost twice my height. And the head tilted sideways as if it was watching me. I blinked. Hard looked behind me, no one. I turned off the lamp, turned it back on. Still 3 shadows. I waved my hand, only my shadow moved. The other 2 stood still. Silent watching, I ran out of the room, slept on the couch that night. The next morning I convinced myself it was a trick of the light, maybe something outside, maybe old stains on the wall. I moved the lamp, rearranged the bed, cleaned everything. That night I returned to sleep in the room, at first only one shadow mine. I sighed with relief and turned to grab my phone from the nightstand. When I looked back, they were there again. No sound, no movement, just present on Saturday. I invited my friend Mark over. I didn't tell him everything, just said the lighting looked weird. We stood in the room light on. He squinted at the wall. Dude, why are there 3 shadows? I didn't answer. He waved his arms. His shadow moved mine to the other 2 still frozen. Mark laughed nervously. You got ghosts or something. I didn't laugh. Mark never came back to my place. After that, each night, since the shadows have moved slightly at first, they stayed by the bedpost. Then a few nights later they were at the center of the bed. Now they stand at the edge closest to my pillow. And sometimes I see them while lying down in the ceiling, upside down like spiders waiting to drop. I set up my phone to record overnight. Next morning, I watched the footage at 2:47 a.m. The lamp flickered, then I saw them, 2 shapes just barely visible stirred over me, not shadows, shapes. Their outlines were darker than the room itself, like they swallowed light at 2:50 a.m. One leaned close to my face and whispered, almost time. I tried sleeping in a hotel. The shadows followed, even without a lamp. I could see faint movement along the wall. The feeling of being watched never left. I don't know how they came, I don't know what they want, but I know they're waiting. One night I screamed into the darkness, what do you want? Silence. Then the lamp turned off on its own, and I heard breathing, slow, shallow, right by my ear. Sometimes now I wake up with my blanket folded perfectly at my feet. I never sleep that way. Or the bed is made before I get out. But the worst, one morning I found a note under my pillow, just one word. Soon I've stopped trying to escape. No matter where I sleep, no matter what I block, cover or unplug, the shadows are there, and now they whisper in my dreams, telling me stories, memories that aren't mine, of deaths, of accidents, of people who went to sleep and never woke up tonight. I saw something new. There were 4 shadows on the wall, and I wasn't in the room yet. If you ever see a shadow that doesn't move with you, run. If your bed ever casts more than 1 shadow, don't lie down. And if you feel something watching you at 300 you're not alone. You never were. The shadows are already inside.